A little-known story about our former president. It seems during one of his campaign tours, he kept running into the same guy in the airport. He had a long white beard. He was wearing a brown robe. He carried a staff. He was a dead ringer for Charlton Heston. The first time he sees him, George W. gets all excited. "Wow," he says, "aren't you Moses?" But the guy just turns around and runs away. Later in the restroom, he sees him again. "I swear you're Moses," he says. But the guy just washes his hands and walks out the door. Finally, just before George W. is about to board his flight, he sees him one more time. This time he runs right up to the guy, grabs him by the arm. "Please," he says, "just tell me, are you Moses?" "Oh," says the guy. "Yes," he said, "I am, and I know I've been rude, but you've got to understand, my friend, the last time I talked to a bush, I ended up wandering in the desert for 40 years. Ah, yes, Moses and his famous encounter with the burning bush. One of the best known stories in the Bible. Yet in truth, this story is really not about the bush at all. As one scholar writes, the bush is simply a divine attention-getting device. It's how God gets Moses to stop and pay heed. And no wonder. Let's be fair. It is, after all, just another ordinary day in the neighborhood for the man from Egypt. Without the bush, he just would have meandered on by. Moses, you may remember, had a rather auspicious start in life. The whole floating down the Nile in the basket, rescued by Pharaoh's daughter, being raised in the palace thing. Quite the opening act for a boy born to a Hebrew slave woman. But then things had gone a bit awry. Moses had been out on his horse one day as a grown man when he spotted a guard thrashing a Hebrew slave, beating him so hard that he dies, and suddenly, overcome by a sense of solidarity, Moses had killed the guard. And then, wanted for murder, he flees Egypt, goes to a place called Midian, hooks up with his father-in-law, and becomes a shepherd. That's what brings him to this remote part of the wilderness, this remote part of the countryside. That's what brings him to Mount Horeb. It's just another day, tending his sheep, making his way down the path. And suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he spots this bush, seemingly ablaze, and yet it's not burning, it's not consumed. Curious, he walks over to check it out, when suddenly a voice calls out to him, "Moses, Moses!" "Here I am." "Stop right there. Take off your shoes. You're standing on holy ground." The text doesn't tell us if Moses doffs his sandals or not. We can only assume he does. But the point is this: he has to be told what to do because he doesn't realize, at least not at first, that he's on sacred soil. I mean, other than the bush, it looks exactly like the pasture land he passes through every day. And frankly, the last thing Moses expects to encounter on his daily round is God. So what about you? Do you expect to encounter God on your daily round? Or like Moses, do you need to be startled into recognizing the holy presence? Because this story tells us God can and does show up anywhere. Anywhere. And sometimes we need to be reminded of that. I had a parishioner named George in a former parish who lived just up the street from our church building. He was largely housebound as he cared for his wife, who had a very advanced case of Alzheimer's. It was a very hard life for George. His wife was often belligerent, sometimes even abusive towards him. It was a real challenge. But he loved her, and so he hung in with her. More than once, George told me how important his prayers were to his ability to carry on. After a long day of caretaking well into the evening, I knew George would be up at 2 or 3 in the morning saying his prayers. And one day, George told me that just seeing our church steeple down the road was all he needed to remember God's presence in the midst of his life. One year I took our youth group on a mission trip to San Francisco. As part of that experience, we visited Grace Cathedral, home of the modern-day Labyrinth movement. As we walked into the sanctuary with its beautiful indoor labyrinth, I was struck by the palpable sense of God's presence. That place, that labyrinth, which the kids all walked, helped to center them and helped to center all of us in the midst of that week in which we were tending to the needs of the homeless, the downtrodden, folks with AIDS there in San Francisco. The labyrinth was for us a tangible reminder of God's presence in the midst of San Francisco, even as our beautiful labyrinth in the courtyard is a symbol of God's presence here among us. The truth is, we do need church buildings and shrines. We do need steeples and labyrinths and burning bushes to remind us of God's presence in our midst. But we make a huge mistake if we think, even for a moment, that God is restricted to such places. One of my teachers, the late Jerry May, was an incredibly gifted psychiatrist and spiritual director. His last book, published posthumously, was all about his experience of the great outdoors, what he liked to refer to as the wilderness. For most of his life, Jerry found great solace in the woods. As he camped and fished, he felt a very close connection to God. In the early 90s, Jerry went through an especially difficult time in his life. He had become more and more tied down to his office in metropolitan Washington, and his work was feeling very mundane, very routine. A few friendships came to an end. His mother died. He felt distant and disconnected from God and from others. Through it all, he writes, I was feeling an increasingly passionate yearning for God, And somehow that yearning connected with the wilderness. So began a series of camping trips to the Green Ridge State Forest in western Maryland. And there, Jerry did experience anew the presence of God. He didn't see a burning bush, but he often sat by a burning campfire, soaking in the silence, connecting with God's presence. But then life took another turn. And near the end of the book, Jerry recounts how in time he discovered that he didn't really need to have a burning campfire. He didn't need to go into the woods to find God. You see, Jerry contracted cancer. And in the end, he couldn't go camping. He couldn't go fishing. He couldn't build a fire. In fact, at times he was completely confined to home or hospital. Writing in his last months, he says, "I am sick now. The prospect of death is continually before me. My body is frail, my energy always at the end of exhaustion. At the same time, I am wilder than I have ever been before. My soul basks in wilderness, and I'm grateful, for you see, in truth, wilderness is everywhere. You don't have to go tromping in the mountains or the desert as I did. You may find it in a local park, an open field, or a small wood. You may even find it in your own room or your own body and mind. All it takes is listening for wisdom's call, listening for God's voice." It was that knowledge that God is present everywhere that it allowed Jerry to face death with a firm belief that he was indeed loved and accompanied by the Creator of all that is. Moses was tending sheep. George was tending his sick wife. The youth group was tending to the needs of the poor. Jerry was tending a campfire. Very different places, very different circumstances, very different people. But all of them experienced anew the presence of God in the midst of their daily lives. All of them were on holy ground. And so, my sisters and brothers, so are you. Not just here in our sanctuary, but wherever you find yourself on Sanibel, Captiva, in Fort Myers and beyond. Wildlife Drive, Bowman's Beach, Shell Point Boulevard, Summerlin Road, Hope, Indiana, Saginaw, Michigan, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Afghanistan, Sochi. Wherever you are on holy ground. For what makes ground holy is the presence of God. And God is present in all places, at all times. So shuck off your loafers, unbuckle your sandals. It's time to go shoeless on Sanibel. Amen. The boys in the band are gracious enough to allow me to join them, but they said I had to wear the uniform. So I got out my short sleeve white shirt and my dark tie. I think I'm all set. We're going to invite you to join us for... We've got a pamphlet I can butcher. We're going to invite you to join us as we sing May the Circle Be Unbroken. You'll find the words to the chorus printed in your bulletin. Sisters and brothers, you're standing on holy ground. And you know, you need to take your shoes off. I should have worn loafers. I knew I was going to do this. You need to take those shoes off. And don't worry, it's shoes and coat are all I'm going to take off. Because you're on holy ground. Wherever you are, you're standing on holy ground. Don't make a mistake about it, because there are lots of places you go where it don't feel too holy. But it's holy ground because God is present. And wherever the good Lord is holy. And that includes every place you might go. So take off those shoes, take off those sandals, be connected to the ground you're on, for it's holy. Amen.